Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press. And join us for the upcoming Central Valley Daily Social. Come to the KVPR studios to get a behind-the-scenes look at the making of this podcast. Join us this Thursday, October 9th for pizza, drinks, and a Q&A with the podcast team. Space is limited. Find more details, including how to RSVP, at kvpr.org/events.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Monday, October 6th. I'm Carrie Klein, in for Elizabeth Arkalian. It's now been over a year since bird flu started spreading in dairy cows across the Central Valley.
The problem with dairies is they're open. They're farms. There's birds flying in and out. There's only so much you can do.
Coming up, we hear an update from the state veterinarian about where we stand right now with bird flu. That conversation in just a moment.
Support for Central Valley Daily comes from Fresno Mazda, part of the Prieto Automotive family, leading the industry in the IIHS 2025 Top Safety Pick Awards, helping move Mazda closer to the goal of eliminating traffic fatalities. More information and the Mazda digital showroom available at myfresnomazda.com.
And now to our feature story. Avian influenza, or bird flu, was making major headlines a year ago. That's because it was just around Labor Day 2024 that the first case of bird flu was reported in a California dairy herd. And within months, hundreds of the state's dairies were under quarantine with sick and dying cattle. Almost 36 dairy workers became infected. Fortunately, none of them died. All that after millions of commercial chickens and ducks had to be euthanized for the virus. Today, the picture is better. Human cases stalled earlier this year, but animals are still being infected, and in some cases, reinfected. To give us some context on how bird flu infections have changed in just 1 year and what this means for animal and public health, I spoke with California State Veterinarian Dr. Annette Jones. She starts our discussion today by telling us how the outbreak impacted dairy farms last year.
I can assure you it was a very long trip for them as this virus moved from dairy to dairy, and some of the dairies were really significantly impacted with pretty sick cows. But the good news is that most of them have recovered now. We only have, out of at one point we had 700 total, cumulative total of 776 dairies under quarantine for highly pathogenic avian influenza, and that's out of about 1,000, so that's quite a few. Mm-hmm. At this point, we're down to 32 dairies, so most have recovered really nicely.
Yeah, and can you talk a little bit about what the consequences really were at any example dairy? Most of the cows may have recovered, but many of them died, and then many of those that recovered may not have recovered all of their milk production, right? Kind of talk about the other effects aside from just whether they tested positive or negative.
Okay, yeah, sure. I think it did vary a bit from dairy to dairy, exactly what the virus did to the cows as it moved through the dairy. Most often, many cows became sick really quickly, so it just overwhelmed the normal hospital treatment system on dairies, and so they really had to scramble to make sure they were getting enough fluid and electrolytes and resting space for the cows as they got sick. I think that's the most common thing I heard, was just the numbers surprised them. The recovery, a lot of them did recover to full production. Many didn't come back, and a lot of them were just cold early because they couldn't make it back into production, so they moved out of the milk stream. So that's really why they lost most of them.
And cold, is that euthanized or just pulled to a different part of the ranch?
Cold means they just go to recover, and eventually they go to get harvested for food production once they're clear of the virus.
Okay, so this is bird flu, most common strain H5N1. So was it surprising that this could affect cattle, and specifically dairy cattle?
Well, I was certainly surprised just over a year ago now. When I first started hearing about the mystery disease in Texas, I can remember saying there's no way it's bird flu when the rumors first started that it was bird flu, but sure enough, it was bird flu. So I would say that first spillover event was a surprise, especially as it adapted to move cow to cow. Once that happened, though, I don't think we were too shocked to see it continue to move from cow to cow, across the country and throughout the state. It's just a highly infectious virus.
Right. And it did seem to affect dairy cattle more so than other cattle species, right?
Yeah, that's true. And there's a couple of research projects looking into that. Is there a genetic component to that? Probably, because we definitely, even in our dairy cattle, there's some differences between Holsteins and Jerseys, for example. So we do believe there's some sort of a genetic predisposition to the virus.
I'm curious to know if this bird flu outbreak has changed how farmers and their crews operate. Have sanitary standards changed at all in the long term and not just to kind of meet the emergency as it was happening?
Yeah, I think a few things were impacted. One, there was a whole new awareness on employee protection and making sure that, if there's a cow with this type of an infection, that at least in the milk parlor, that the employees have the proper protective equipment so that they can stay safe and keep coming to work and have happy, healthy lives. And I think that conscious level of consciousness continues. Dairies now have things like N95 masks in supply in case they need them in the future. And so that's a change. And then biosecurity, which are the actions that farms take to try and prevent viruses or bacteria from moving on or off the farm. That did come to light again through this outbreak. But the problem with dairies is they're open. They're farms. There's birds flying in and out. There's only so much you can do. But I do believe some practices are here to stay. And mostly it's just being conscious of traffic, who's coming on and off, and where are they going. Keeping as many people away from where the cows are as possible in case they're accidentally tracking, any kind of a virus or bacteria on your farm. So I think that level of consciousness has gone up. And then the last one is knowing, where your cows are coming from. So, and if you're not sure of their health status before you bring them onto your dairy, putting them in an isolation pen. I think that is something most dairies are aware of anyway, but it probably just reinforced those best practices.
Okay, well, so according to the LA Times, the federal government has paid California dairy farmers more than $230 million in indemnity payments to cover and subsidize losses in milk production because of bird flu. From what you understand, have those funds been a help?
So I'm not familiar with the exact dollars, but I do know for a fact that sometimes those payments were absolutely critical to getting a dairy farm through this virus. Because when, like I mentioned before, if a large part of your herd is suddenly affected, and the main way that they're affected is they quit producing milk or you have to pull them out of the milk stream, that makes it impossible to keep getting your milk checked so you can pay your employees, you can buy food, you can keep the electricity on, you can keep the fans running. So I do know those payments made a big difference, and that's what kept some of our dairies in business. And because what they produce is such a critical staple, I think it really was important.
Now, I imagine you keep in close touch with some farmers and farmer associations about all of this. Do they feel like they're still in recovery mode from bird flu, or have folks, been able to move on?
That's a good question. I feel like for the most part, they feel like they're moving on. We have seen a few dairies that they had cleared the virus, they had tested negative multiple times in a row. So we were able to lift the quarantine. Their cows were healthy, but we continue our surveillance. So just if you're not aware, in the state, we're still testing every single dairy to make sure they're staying free from disease. And so a couple of weeks or months later, they'll test positive again because they become reinfected. The virus has been reinduced, or we're looking into why. So we did have some new cases or reintroduced cases, and a little bit of an uptick in maybe July, August timeframe. Those cows did recover really fast. Some of them got sick, but some of them didn't get sick at all. But they all recovered pretty fast, and they were able to move off quarantine. But I'm mentioning that because, these are dairies that thought they were through it. They thought their herds were immune, and then here they are seeing it again. So the numbers are pretty small. I think a total of just over 50. Most of them are back off quarantine again, though.
Okay, well, before I let you go, Annette, I also wanted to note that there have recently been bird flu outbreaks in turkeys in states like Utah and Minnesota. While we only produce about 3% of the country's turkey population, is an outbreak in California turkeys a concern?
It's not just turkeys. What the real concern is, it's the wild bird and the wild bird migration. And in the fall, they go north to south in the Pacific coast. And we're in that flyway, the Pacific Flyway. And typically, where we start to see the spillover from wild birds like ducks, for example, that could carry avian influenza and not look sick, they could spread the virus into either turkeys or chickens or ducks, domestic ducks. So we are concerned about that. And it just so happens that some of those northern states that are exposed first to these migrating birds happen to raise a lot of turkeys. So it's not just the turkeys themselves, it's the poultry. So we are working very closely and talking to our poultry industry very frequently about, remind all of your employees about biosecurity, make sure your foot baths, if that's what you use, or, whatever other biosecurity practices that you have, make sure they're in full use, because we are entering bird flu season when it comes to our migrating waterfowl.
Gotcha. So case rates are declining in cattle. Can't say the same. We're not out of the woods with poultry.
Exactly. And normally that's the norm, is it's a wild bird to domestic poultry disease. This happened in 2015 and the wild birds cleared it within a year, which we were all hoping that's what would happen in 2022 when we first saw this new strain. But unfortunately, those wild birds haven't cleared this new strain, and they're continuing to bring it with them when they migrate. And that's what looks like it's happening yet another year. So hopefully the biosecurity will keep all of our domestic poultry safe. That's what we're all hoping and praying for right now.
Annette Jones, State Veterinarian for the California Department of Food and Agriculture. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
And that's today's show. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Carrie Klein. You can find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
Sources and methods, the crown jewels of the intelligence community. Shorthand for how do we know what's real? Who told us? If you have those answers, you're on the inside, and NPR wants to bring you there. From the Pentagon to the State Department to spy agencies, listen to understand what's really happening and what it means for you. Sources and Methods, the new national security podcast from NPR.